I arrived at the restaurant with my hopes still intact. I had asked them to prepare a large table, adorned with flowers and a bottle of wine ready to be uncorked. It was my birthday, and I expected to see my wife, my brother, and the rest of my family walk through the door at any moment. The waiters arranged the silverware, anticipating a celebration, while I watched the clock, convinced that the delay was merely a matter of traffic. I ordered a coffee to mask the wait, trying not to look like a man sitting alone at a table set for 10. 30 minutes passed. No one appeared. The atmosphere shifted. The glances from other tables were no longer neutral. They were the curious, pitying eyes of strangers. The restaurant was alive with laughing groups and toasting couples, and I was still alone. Swallowing my discomfort, I dialed my wife. She answered to the sound of clinking glasses and a laugh that needed no explanation. With shameless clarity, she told me she was in Europe, celebrating with my brother. She told me not to hurt myself with silly notions, that they knew how to have a better time. Each word felt like a sharp blow to the face. I didn't respond. I hung up without giving her the satisfaction of hearing my voice break. I stared at the table as one might look upon a corpse, the corpse of my marriage, of my family, of all the false promises they had made me believe. The waiters continued to pass by. One asked if I was still expecting company. I lied, saying they would be here soon, though I already knew no one was coming. I took out my phone, opened the gallery, and selected the photo I had prepared weeks ago. This was no coincidence. It was a cold, calculated plan. I had taken a picture of myself in front of the empty table, but I had edited the image, adding the one detail that would change everything. A surprise guest. I sent it to the family group chat with a simple message. Thank you for making room for me in your schedule. Not another word. I turned off my phone and poured myself a glass of wine. If my wife and brother had chosen to mock me, I had chosen not to give them a show. That silence was my first response. That photograph, my first move. War isn't won by shouting into a telephone, but with patience and precision. And I had just made my opening play. The photo I sent did not show a defeated man at an empty table. On the contrary, I made sure I appeared with the only guest who truly mattered, my father's old partner, a man with influence in both politics and business, whose mere presence could disrupt any family equilibrium. That image, already circulating through my relatives' phones within seconds, was enough to silence the clinking of their glasses in Europe. They thought they had left me to sink, but I had an ace up my sleeve. The partner was no stranger to them. They knew that for years he had been the silent pillar behind the biggest contracts that sustained the family business. To see him sitting beside me, a gesture of quiet complicity, was a declaration of war without words. I didn't need to add explanations or threats. The photo was enough for them to understand that my isolation was merely an illusion. While they reveled in their luxury trip, I was raising a glass with someone who could crush them without lifting another finger. It was a calculated contrast. They sought to humiliate me with their absence, but I had turned that absence into the perfect stage to show them how little I truly needed them. The image held no sadness, no defeat. It held silent power. The partner, sipping his wine, smiled at my composure. He told me He was proud of my calm, that such patience was more lethal than any outburst. Let them laugh now, he murmured, because soon no one will remember their toasts. They will only remember your silence. That sentence was seared into my mind like a verdict. I knew the calls would come, that my wife would try to clarify, manipulate, or even mock me again. But with my phone off, every second of their desperation was my victory. And so, in a restaurant where everyone else celebrated loudly, I savored the difference. They had noise. I had a strategy. As we enjoyed our meal, the partner spoke to me with a frankness I had never heard from my own family. He said he had always trusted me more than my brother, that behind my brother's smiles of superiority, he had seen nothing but arrogance and incompetence. Your father knew it, he added, but he let time put everyone in their place, and believe me, that time has come. His words were not empty flattery. He brought documents, shares in the company he still controlled, key pieces my brother thought he had secured. We reviewed numbers, contracts, and transactions my brother had overlooked in his arrogant rush. I discovered that his supposed strength was nothing more than a house of cards, held up by appearances and hidden debts. The partner explained how, with a little patience, it would all collapse on its own. I wouldn't have to get my hands dirty. I just had to be ready to take what had always been mine. Listening to him was like having a blindfold removed. For years, they had made me feel like the family pariah, the failure who should accept their scraps. Now, I understood it was just the opposite. They were the ones who had been living an illusion, and I was the only one who could carry my father's legacy with a steady hand. This wasn't about immediate revenge. It was about inevitable justice. My wife, I thought, had bet on the wrong horse. She had left me for the momentary glitter of travel and my brother's arrogance, never imagining that same ambition would be their downfall. The partner summed it up best. You don't need to fight. Let his own hunger devour him. You just watch and wait. By the end of the meal, we had sealed a tacit agreement. He would back me silently. I would wait patiently. There were no contracts, no signatures, just an alliance forged in the experience of a man who had seen empires rise and fall. In that moment, I understood that what began as a birthday humiliation was, in fact, the beginning of their end. In the days that followed, I moved with calculated stealth. I made no accusations, demanded nothing in public. I simply reconnected with contacts I had let go since my father's death. Old suppliers, financial advisors, and loyal employees who had been pushed aside by my brother began to meet with me in private. I didn't need to convince them of much. I just had to show them the reports the partner had shared. Cooked books, broken contracts, and inflated invoices. What I held in my hands wasn't gossip. It was dynamite, disguised as paperwork. And its power lay in the fact that it hadn't yet exploded. It was merely leaking smoke, allowing suspicion to spread. Within weeks, the conversations in the company hallways changed. Where once they spoke of my brother's impeccable management, now there were doubts. Suppliers delayed deliveries, investors postponed meetings, employees questioned decisions. It was only a murmur, but it was enough for the facade of power to begin to crack. Prestige is not lost in a single blow. It bleeds out through persistent rumors. And I made sure every rumor had a root in reality, a silent proof that could stand if anyone tried to deny it. Meanwhile, my wife's tone shifted from mockery to bewilderment. The first message was sarcasm disguised as affection. What a lovely photo with that fossil. Do you really think anyone believes you? I didn't reply. 2 days later, a different tone. We need to talk. You can't just ignore me like this. Silence. Then came the longer audio messages, her voice cracking, her attempts to mask concern with reproaches. I didn't lift a finger. That was my first victory, making her understand that her words no longer held any value, that her laughter on that phone call had sealed her own irrelevance. The void I left was crueler than any insult. The partner, seeing my resolve, reminded me that the war was already underway. Your brother doesn't need external enemies. He's digging his own grave. You just need to be there to give the final push. Following his advice, I planted seeds of doubt in strategic places. A banker who owed my father a favor received an envelope with compromising information. A foreign executive who had tried to partner with us discovered a clause my brother had manipulated against him. A political official heard a quiet warning that investing in my brother's projects was like betting on a sinking ship. None of these moves bore my name. They all seemed like coincidences or fortunate discoveries, but each one added weight to the coming fall. And so, without raising my voice, I achieved what years of submission never had. I had them all watching my every move, without me even trying. My wife's phone filled with desperate messages I never answered, and my brother's arrogant face began to show cracks at social gatherings. I remained silent, savoring the irony. They had wanted my birthday to be a humiliation, a reminder that I was alone. But what they had done was open the first wound in their own empire, and while they tried to figure out what was happening, I already knew I was just getting started. What began as rumors soon solidified into undeniable facts. One of the largest construction firms my brother worked with suddenly announced the cancellation of a multi-million-dollar contract. The news spread like wildfire. Financial papers reported on it, and the company's stock plummeted within hours. At the same time, a group of foreign investors who once hailed him as a visionary quietly withdrew their capital, leaving a hole no lender was willing to fill. The cracks were no longer invisible. They were gaping wounds, eating away at the image of power he and my wife had so carefully projected with their trips, their toasts, and their mockery. My brother reacted as the arrogant always do. He thought he could stop the bleeding with speeches. He called impromptu press conferences, spoke of temporary adjustments, false rumors, and external attacks. But his voice trembled, and the journalists smelled weakness. Every word he spoke was another shot in his own foot, confirming that something was deeply rotten. I watched it all in silence, with no need to appear on stage, enjoying how the facade they had built with such contempt was collapsing under its own weight. The partner would send me press clippings with an ironic note. You couldn't destroy him this fast if you tried. My wife, in parallel, went from hubris to desperation. The once mocking texts became disguised pleas. We need to talk. I know you're behind this. We can fix it. Not everything is lost. Don't ignore me. You know we can still be together. There was a detail in her messages that gave me a cold pleasure. Not once did she apologize. She was only trying to save herself from the shipwreck. She never acknowledged the mockery of that birthday, nor her betrayal in leaving with my brother. In her mind, I was still the man she could manipulate with tears and hollow promises. I didn't reply to a single line. Indifference was my sword, and she bled with every moment of my silence. The social gatherings, where they were once met with applause, became corridors of whispers and sneers. At a private dinner, an acquaintance sent me a photo of the two of them, sitting at a table. No one approached. The same people who once competed for their attention now avoided them like a plague. That public loneliness was more devastating than any direct attack. She, accustomed to being the winner's wife, now sat beside a man who was falling apart. And though she tried to mask her anguish with expensive dresses, the emptiness around her was a perfect reflection of her mistake. I, meanwhile, did not celebrate in bars or shout my victories. I spent my days meeting with the pieces that remained standing, forging alliances in silence, preparing the ground for the final blow. Every crack in my brother's empire was a reminder that patience pays more than rage. And every desperate message from my wife was a confirmation that their fate was already sealed. They had dug their own grave with mockery and ambition, and I was just waiting for the perfect moment to cover it with dirt. The private fall of my brother and wife was already evident, but they still had one refuge: social appearances. They believed that at elite events, they could still maintain their mask of power. It was at a corporate gala that this final illusion was shattered. I received an official invitation, not as an awkward addition, but as the rightful heir to my father's legacy. That simple distinction announced the changing of the guard. I arrived, dressed in calculated discretion, accompanied by the partner everyone had assumed was retired. Heads turned toward us, as if they had seen a ghost return to set things right. The contrast was brutal. My brother and my wife entered minutes later, trying to hold their heads high, but the room no longer belonged to them. No one rose to applaud. No one approached them with enthusiasm. There were only forced smiles, obligatory greetings, and uncomfortable silences that said everything. The women who once flattered my wife now watched her with the cruel curiosity of those who enjoy another's downfall. And the men who used to drink with my brother simply turned their backs. In a corner, a financial journalist greeted me with deference and murmured, "Everyone is waiting to hear what you have to say." It was then that I understood I no longer needed revenge. The world was exacting it for me. The evening progressed with speeches and awards. When my name was called to accept a posthumous tribute to my father, I felt each step I took toward the stage land like a heavy blow against them. I took the microphone, thanked them for the honor, and spoke of my father's vision, of the importance of discipline and honesty in business. I never mentioned my brother or my wife. I didn't have to. The comparison was already in everyone's mind. While I spoke with calm and conviction, they sank into the silence, unable to meet anyone's gaze. The applause was deafening. Every clap that echoed through the hall was a public slap in the face to those who had tried to erase me. My wife watched me with a mixture of fear and regret. Her eyes, though expertly made up to command attention, could not hide the look of utter defeat. She knew she had gambled everything on a man who was no longer untouchable, but a corporate corpse in slow motion. She tried to approach me a few times, but I was always surrounded by directors, politicians, and businessmen who now treated me as the true successor. Her desperation was palpable, and the cold indifference I offered in return was more cutting than any insult. This was the same woman who had laughed in my face on my birthday. Now, her eyes pleaded for a shared glance, a hint of complicity that she would never receive from me again. By the time the gala ended, the image was sealed in the public mind. My brother and my wife slipped out a side door, their heads bowed, avoiding the cameras and the whispers. I, on the other hand, remained, bathed in the glow of congratulations and firm handshakes. The trip that, just months before, had been an occasion for luxury and mockery at my expense, had now become the prelude to their ruin. Their private humiliation had become a public spectacle, and the best part? I hadn't had to lift a finger. I only had to wait. Their own arrogance did the rest. And on that night, the world finally saw clearly who the true heir was. The spectacle at the gala was merely the overture. What followed was the methodical execution of the collapse I had so long awaited. With the legal backing of my father's partner and a team of lawyers who knew every crack in the balance sheets, a lawsuit was filed against my brother for fraud and mismanagement. It didn't take long for the judges to order a freeze on his assets. Bank accounts blocked, luxury cars impounded, properties seized. In a matter of weeks, he went from bragging about private jets to being unable to meet his company's payroll. The press devoured him daily, with headlines that reduced him from a visionary entrepreneur to a disgraced executive under investigation. It was a blow from which there would be no recovery. My wife, the one who had once laughed at me, her voice ringing with derision, was now trapped in the very ruin she had so eagerly chosen. She went from office to office, seeking favors, but no one would extend a hand. She was the wife of the fallen, a liability everyone was desperate to avoid. She tried to contact me again and again, her messages shifting from reproach to raw supplication. We can fix this. I always believed in you. Don't ignore me. Don't leave me in this solitude. Every word was a reflection of the desperation of someone who had realized their mistake far too late. I never responded. For me, her silence on my birthday had been the end. This was just her wallowing in the filth of her own making. The company, meanwhile, was unraveling at an accelerating pace. Investors pulled their capital, clients terminated their contracts, and veteran employees fled like rats from a sinking ship. My brother, desperate, tried to plug the holes with illegal loans and impossible promises. But every move was documented, strengthening the case against him. The same people who had once flattered him now testified against him, offering up proof of his corruption to save themselves. The empire he had built on arrogance crumbled stone by stone under the watchful gaze of a world that savored every crack. I had no need to get my hands dirty. I watched from a distance with the calm of a man who knew how to wait. Every headline announcing his downfall was a reminder that my revenge had not been an act of rage, but a cold, patient strategy. I took no pleasure in shouts or celebrations. My victory was the silence that now surrounded me, the quiet assurance that I had reclaimed my dignity while those who had scorned me were left to crawl through their ruin. My father's partner said it best, a small smile on his face. Your father would be proud, not just because you took back what was yours, but because you did it without losing yourself. In the end, when all that was left was rubble, I savored the peace they had denied me for years. There was no need to humiliate them further. The world had already done that for me. My brother faced endless trials, his assets confiscated, his name destroyed. My wife, abandoned by all those who had once flocked to her, was left alone, stripped of her prestige and her wealth, reduced to a faint echo of the woman she thought she was. And I, without a single shout, without a single blow, without a single plea, had emerged victorious. The truest revenge wasn't destroying them with my own hands. It was watching their own ambition devour them whole, while I remained steadfast, unbroken, the master of my own silence.